Last year, after I published my Game of the Year 2019 video, a full 12 months after the year itself ended in December 2020, I received a comment by longtime subscriber 1979 Devil's Advocate that said, quote, "I like the idea of doing these a year later because it really gives people a chance to play everything from the previous year." That comment felt like permission to procrastinate for an entire year all over again. So I did. To be honest, I was going to make an elaborate intro for this video about being trapped in the liminal void in between realities, and I'd been trapped there for an entire year, and the Liam who'd been reviewing indie games on the channel wasn't the real me, it was an imposter. But that seems a bit elaborate. Look, it's been 12 months. If you wanted humour, you'd be watching Scott the Woz. Anyway, all I really have to say in this intro portion is enjoy the video, and I'll be back this time next year probably to talk about Death's Door or whatever. Oh, piss, that's a spoiler. Well, 2020 was a year. Look, I get it, even 12 months on, I reckon you're done hearing people ban on about the hellscape that was 2020. I mean, let's face it, 2021 hasn't necessarily been much better. Why reflect on the shit that used to clog your toilet when you're currently knee-deep in piss? But despite, there was still much to celebrate in 2020. New consoles ushered in a fresh and exciting generation, long in-development experiences finally saw the light of day, and Jeff Keighley, finding himself trapped in his apartment, was forced to talk to Alf for our amusement isn't the right word, maybe that bit wasn't a positive experience for anyone involved, especially Alf. 2020 was a really strong year in terms of games, which was lucky considering the global need for engaging forms of escapism. Due to the nature of multi-year development schedules, the pandemic had little effect on games scheduled to launch during 2020, with us only really starting to feel the repercussions of studios having to work from home in 2021 instead. This meant that numerous opulent, high-profile releases launched during the year, providing a strong lineup that celebrated the final months of the 8th generation of consoles. I played a lot of big-budget AAA games in 2020, more so than in any other year. Alongside the usual slew of incredible indie releases, this video is going to be my biggest Game of the Year video to date. There were just too many games for me to choose from, and free time is a luxury I refuse to give to myself. Fuck you, you weird northern bastard. Get back on your computer. It's time to make more content. As much as I'd like to joke about this video being 12 months quote-unquote late again, I've got to say there is something really satisfying about appraising a year of releases with the benefit of a bit of distance. Thanks to holding off for an entire year, I've been able to discover more, play more, and perhaps most importantly, appraise titles with a more critical eye than I would have done if I'd slapped together a list last December for the benefit of hitting an arbitrary deadline that's imposed by who? Jeff Keighley? He does his awards a month before the year even ends. What does he know? It Takes Two for Best Narrative, Jeff. Go to bed. Oh, come here. Give me a kiss before you go. Mwah. Anyway. Can't tell if this lighting makes me look creepy. Ba ba ba. Ba ba ba. Anyway, enough dicking around. Let's get started. This video is already way too late, just like the last one. I've ironed a shirt for this video. I got a haircut this morning. I shaved. I have positioned the camera in the living room because it looks more sophisticated than my terrible study. I've already put too much effort into this. Let's just talk about video games that are a year old. Crash Bandicoot 4: It's About Time was probably the game that surprised me the most in 2020. Not only was it announced over the summer and then released a few months later, which by the way is the ideal way of announcing and then launching a game, CD Projekt Red, maybe take some notes on that one. It's also the most faithful sequel to Naughty Dog's marsupial orange mascot in the 22 years since they relinquished control of him and went off to make overly drawn out, long-winded games about how bad violence is or whatever. Oh, and also slight spoilers, you're not gonna see that game make an appearance in this list. I don't know whether you can tell, I have some complicated thoughts about Murder Simulator 2020. Many developers have attempted to capture the magic of the original Crash Bandicoot trilogy over the years and have ultimately fallen short. These games have tended to lack polish, imagination, or have been a physical DLC pack for a Toys to Life game. But with Crash 4, developer Beenox proved that they understood what makes those 3 PlayStation 1 classics so beloved. Crash 4 is a playable Saturday morning cartoon, and it excels in delivering that distinctly 90s sense of mascot silliness. The game is stuffed with big dumb villains, fun enemies, wacky environments, and bizarre situations. It even brings back characters in a way that feels faithful and not cheap, often transforming them completely into something fresh. Torna is a good example of this, taking the bimbo femme fatale that only appeared in the original release and making her an action movie badass. The core gameplay is sublime. There's a lot that's aged poorly with the original trilogy. If I ever have to suffer through Slippery Climb again in my lifetime, I'm going to vomit blood. But Crash 4 feels snappier, tighter. Subtle changes like clearly marking your landing position, for instance, remove unnecessary frustrations that come part and parcel with a fixed camera linear 3D platformer. The end result is a game that retains the challenge of the originals without any of the bullshit that makes them feel dated in the modern era. It's not all perfect, of course. I will never be able to 100% complete this game. For instance, it's way too hard, and you could argue that mopping everything up is a thankless, grueling task. But working my way through the main campaign and reaching the end credits felt like a real achievement. Even the additional content is fun. The VHS levels offer pitch-perfect platforming puzzles that are kind of unparalleled by anything else. It all looks stunning, too. One of my favourite things about the Spyro remasters is how developer Beenox, who also developed Crash 4, retained the feel of the original games while applying their own specific visual style. They've done the same here, injecting the game with a vibrancy and freshness that makes it feel new again. It's a brilliant game, one I already can't wait to replay a few years down the line. I'm just kind of bummed out that the team, Beenox, won't be given the reins to Spyro the Dragon 4, even though it's kind of teased within Crash 4, or at least I think it was teased within an art book for Crash 4. I just think they're doomed to make Call of Duty games, because Activision are the fucking worst. Okay, I'm going to start this section by saying that I completely understand all of the criticisms that are levied against Resident Evil 3 Remake. The game is way too short. It cut out a load of iconic locations from the original game, and Nemesis, who could have been this incredible boss that chased you around the whole game, expanding upon Mr. X from Resident Evil 2 Remake, was completely wasted, reserved as he was to a few pretty easy boss fights. But you know what? I still absolutely loved this game. Resident Evil 3 has always been a bit of an outlier when it comes to the original trilogy of Resident Evil titles. It was infamously never meant to be a numbered sequel, and was instead designed to be a more action-focused spin-off that would tide fans over until the release of the first next-gen Resident Evil title, Code Veronica. As a result, the game has always felt a bit off? A bit throwaway, maybe? Sure, it's great to see Jill make her return, and as far as iconic bosses go, the perpetually smiling flesh monster that is the titular Nemesis is an absolute all-timer. And yet, it's not my favourite. It's not anyone's favourite, I don't think. It's good, but it's not amazing. And honestly, my opinions about Resident Evil 3 Remake are the same. Did I enjoy experiencing Jill's frantic attempt to escape the zombie-infested Raccoon City rendered in glorious photorealism in the RE engine? Of course I did. Jill is a wonderful character, and the developers did her justice by giving her short arc more nuance. She's troubled, haunted by the events of the Spencer Mansion, and you really get a sense of that thanks to the stunning facial animations, as well as a superb opening sequence that is genuinely unsettling. Even supporting characters such as Carlos are fleshed out far more substantially than I expected them to be. Curly-haired Carlos is canonical now. Look at this man. Name 2 hotter co-stars in a video game, I dare you. On a similar note, the impeccable combat systems from 2019's Resident Evil 2 Remake return, with the addition of a quick dodge that exemplifies Valentine's training as a special operative compared to RE2's Claire and Leon, who are basically just civilians. The higher zombie count may take away a lot of the tension that made RE2 Remake sin, and I'll be the first to lament RE3R's removal of the juicy limb severing animations from the previous game, presumably scrapped due to the technical limitations of having more zombies on screen. But like I say, RE3 was always intended to be a more action-focused experience compared to its survival horror predecessors. In that sense, RE3 Remake captures the inherent spirit of the original. There are some absolute piss sequences in this game. Defending the hospital as Carlos is utter tripe, but I don't know, I really loved playing this game, being back in this world that I have such fond memories of, rendered to modern standards. Could it have been longer? Obviously. Could they have made Nemesis feel more like a threat? 100%. Clearly the team were too busy pouring all of that Mr. X tech into Lady D from Resident Evil Village, because horny does as horny will. Okay, that's not a phrase and I don't know why it came out like that. Still, it's grand, I had a great time with it, and I'm just happy that it exists. A game about ripping apart derelict spacecraft is the last thing you'd probably expect to be relaxing, and yet the wonderful Hardspace Shipbreaker provided a well-needed amount of respite during the latter half of 2020. Shipbreaker is a release that fits quite neatly into that nebulous genre of games that replicate work. Your farming simulators, your Euro truck simulators. It's a game about performing the same menial task over and over and over in order to slowly unlock new tools, new abilities, and ultimately make enough money to stop doing the task entirely. The difference is that Hardspace Shipbreaker is a science fiction game, tasking you with scrapping spaceships for your employer whom you owe a great debt to. The core loop is as follows. You choose a class of ship to scrap. You navigate over to it using a slightly floaty jetpack, you depressurize the hull, deactivate the generator, and then slowly and methodically pull the wreck apart, salvaging precious items such as computer equipment and life support units before scrapping the various metal panels, plastic installations, and other bits that hold together the interior. Once you're done, it's time to go back, select another ship, and do it all over again. Ultimately, Hardspace Shipbreaker is a game about deconstruction rather than destruction. It's about carefully pulling things apart rather than blowing them up. It's a methodical, meditative experience that is absolutely phenomenal. Although the developers could have easily achieved the majority of the same gameplay beats by creating a game about dismantling a car, the game achieves an increased sense of tactility thanks to its science fiction setting. For starters, with this being space, you can move freely within any direction, allowing you to approach the ship from any angle you choose. Secondly, your arsenal of Dead Space-style space tools allow you to cut and slice with reckless abandon, but despite their fantastical nature, they're used in a wholly grounded way. Ships are secured by brackets, specific points that can be severed via careful slices to allow you to then pull them apart bit by bit. Then there are the tethers, a wholly ridiculous feature that allow you to attach bits of the ship to the incinerator or scrap area, saving you dragging objects around your workspace manually. Through sheer might and force of will, you can do things like scrap an entire cockpit simply by attaching multiple tethers to it. The game's rigid rules can be poked at a little, making minor victories all the more rewarding. The everyday mundanity of science fiction is a fantastic and underutilized perspective on the genre, especially in games. You are literally a nobody in Hardspace Shipbreaker, a character who lives within a presumably incredible depiction of the future, yet sees nothing but its waste products. You are stuck in an impossible sea of debt. You are all but owned by a company. You are a pawn in a capitalist game, unable to win, but forced to constantly play. This is a truly wonderful game that not enough people talk about. It's still in early access, but I can't wait to see what the game's 1.0 release has in store. When the PlayStation 5 first launched, the first game I played on it was Miles Morales. I played about 2 hours, and then I just thought, yeah, I get it. It's not that the game felt bad, completely the opposite. It felt fantastic and looked incredible running on the PlayStation 5, but it just felt too familiar to Spider-Man 2018. So I put it down and went back to playing Cyberpunk instead. It's a joke. I can't lie. Over Christmas, I took some time off and found myself craving something, well, familiar. So I picked Miles Morales back up, and I'm really glad I did. One of my favourite things about 2018 Spider-Man was how sincere its core narrative was. Most superhero stories are dark, gritty interpretations of classic characters that aim for maturity in order to appeal to an older audience. What I liked about Spider-Man was that it felt very genuine. Its characters were endearing, its villains represented more so as pantomime levels of sinister rather than sociopathic serial killers. But whereas the original game was grand in scope, Miles Morales offers a shorter, more contained experience and is arguably all the better for it. Not only does it cut down on the open world busy work that plagued the first game, it allows its core narrative to be better paced, to make emotional moments feel more impactful, and to add additional tension to its more dramatic sequences. Miles is such a wonderful character, the game focusing on the pressures that come with donning the mask of an icon far greater than what he believes himself to be. It's a by-the-numbers story, but it's tackled with such a delicate hand that it largely works. Yeah, you see every beat coming, but that doesn't stop the overall storyline from meaning something to you in the long run. Gameplay-wise, new additions such as the ability to go invisible and the inclusion of Miles' Venom powers makes for a combat system that feels far more complete than the one found in the original game, to the extent that I'm unsure if I'd enjoy going back to boring old Peter Parker when Insomniac releases their upcoming numbered sequel. I think the thing I love the most about these games is that the team at Insomniac truly understand what makes these characters so appealing to fans. Just because your player avatar wears a red suit emblazoned with a spider and swims through New York doesn't mean you've made a successful Spider-Man game, because the character is so much more than that recognizable iconography. For instance, we don't just like Miles because he has cool electricity powers, we like him because he's forced to become a hero in the shadow of someone he sees as greater. He's young and naive, frightened yet enthusiastic, and his journey to understand his own greatness is a more satisfying tale than the actual plot of Big Energy Company is bad, actually. The core gameplay mechanics are as satisfying as they are addictive, and even the open world fluff is fun to tackle if you're looking to mop up some easy trophies. Miles Morales is a wonderful tale that is fun and refreshing to experience, even if it is a little by the numbers compared to its big brother, Spider-Man PlayStation 4. Still, it's great stuff. When Supergiant launched Hades into early access in December 2018, it felt like people either didn't notice or didn't care. I suspect this was because of one of two reasons. The first is that in December 2019, roguelike as a genre was so oversaturated because of the amount of shit that was released onto Steam in the Switch eShop that people weren't really in the mood to play another one. Also, Hades launched exclusively for the then quite controversial Epic Games Store, and maybe some snooty weirdos decided that it just wasn't worth playing because of the platform it was on. Why did people hate the Epic Games Store again? Was it just because of all the exclusives? Was it just because it was taking games away from Steam? Bizarre times. Don't answer that in the comments. That's not an open question. I don't actually care. Looking back, the bones of the game were there, even at this early stage. The magic that makes Hades such a special, wonderful thing. And yet, no one really turned up for the show. Spare a few excited op-eds that attempted to champion this future classic. I honestly think though that this quiet early access period was the best thing that could have happened to Hades. When the game finally celebrated its 1.0 launch in 2020, it released for both Steam and the Nintendo Switch. It felt like the stars had finally aligned for this game. Roguelites had all but evaporated as a genre. The Switch was a super popular console that just became even more popular during the course of 2020, and we'd all been trapped indoors reliving the same day over and over again, living in our own personal version of hell, if you will. So the story of someone trying to escape hell by reliving the same things over and over again, yeah, we could kind of relate to that more than we could in 2018. Also, this is maybe the most important factor to the success of Hades. After so long trapped indoors, we were so horny we were basically quivering in shame like a dog taking a shit. I kid, of course. Sort of. I do think the gorgeous artwork of Supergiant mainstay Gen Z being widely shared across social media provided the game with a marketing campaign so effective no PR firm in the world could have intentionally created it, but still, Hades is a wonderful game, and its incredible success is a testament to the title's inherent quality. You've heard all this before, of course. The game topped multiple Game of the Year lists in 2020 for its impeccable storytelling, which rewards players for dying with snippets of character dialogue that further fleshes out this colourful interpretation of Greek mythology, an innovative twist that uses the framework of a roguelike as a key tool in delivering its narrative. For me, however, it's the gameplay that made Hades a permanent fixture on my Switch home screen for the better part of a year. That core loop is just so Moorish, Zag's abilities so pristine, that at some points I literally couldn't put it down. There are few roguelites that nail the balance between permanent unlocks and randomized abilities, let alone one that manages to blend its roster so beautifully, making discovering new combinations a constant joy. Put simply, Hades feels great to play, and that alone would have placed it high upon this list. But no, it looks gorgeous, it sounds gorgeous, its cast is incredible, and its storyline is engaging. Hades is one of the best.
Rip and tear until it is done.
Do you remember in March 2020, just before the world went to shit, when for a brief period of time people were sharing memes on Twitter that showed Doom Guy with Isabelle from Animal Crossing because both games launched on the same day? That was nice, wasn't it? Yeah, that was nice. What are you doing, cat? For a brief period of time, that felt like it was going to be the most substantial thing that happened that month. I have to confess, I bounced off Doom Eternal after about 4 hours when it was first released. Despite my long-time adoration for the series and recent obsession with retro-inspired shooters, Doom Eternal didn't captivate me as much as I'd expected it to. The issue, I think, was that on PlayStation 4, Doom Eternal felt overly fiddly. Eternal expanded upon 2016 by adding additional layers to its already mechanically dense combat system, and the poor old DualShock 4 felt like it was incapable of keeping up with the on-screen insanity. I'm not that old. Stop laughing at the back. But I just couldn't do it. It made my hands hurt, and I quickly threw it to the wayside in favour of playing more Animal Crossing. I assumed, in between a number of long grumpy exhales, that maybe it just wasn't for me. In April 2021, I finally upgraded my aging computer with a top-of-the-line build. Excited to give it a whirl, I jumped on Game Pass to find something throwaway I could spend an hour playing just to put the PC through its paces. Microsoft had recently completed their acquisition of Bethesda, and as such the PC app was pushing Doom Eternal hard, placing it front and centre whenever you booted up Game Pass. Fuck it, I thought. The game looked stellar on PS4, and it seemed like a good point of comparison to see what this new rig was capable of. 6 hours later, I stumbled out of my office covered in sweat. Doom Eternal hadn't just managed to sink its claws into me this time around, it had basically ripped my ribcage apart and sent my guts spraying against the walls. I was absolutely hooked. Here's the thing, Doom Eternal was clearly designed for PC. Its combat system is so fluid, so demanding of precision and careful timing, that to expect players to master it on a controller feels a bit cruel. With the mouse and keyboard, however, running at 144 frames per second, the game comes alive. I would go as far as to say that after completing the game's extensive campaign, Eternal features the greatest first-person combat system ever devised. The core loop introduced in Doom 2016, whereby players can recuperate ammo and health by performing glory kills, returns, but new features such as the Flame Belch add more rewards for those willing to take further risks. Throw in a bunch of ridiculous new weapons alongside devious new enemies that force the player to shake up their entire playstyle, depending on who they're fighting at any given moment, and you have a game that thrives on its own intensity. You have to play fast. You have to play risky. You will die a lot more than you would in earlier entries, but stick with it, and Eternal offers an experience so fucking brilliant it feels borderline revolutionary. More than anything, Eternal builds upon the fundamental design philosophy defined by the series' original two releases. Yet, combat is more complex, more contemporary, more innovative, but ultimately you are still strafing around an arena, micromanaging groups of enemies in order to survive. The narrative is dumb, although I do appreciate that it often feels like Eternal itself resents that it's there, and the game's obsession with heavy metal imagery borders on cliché, but this still feels like a true Doom sequel in every way possible. I can't believe that after all this time, id still understands what makes Doom so timeless. Eternal is a masterpiece. Unfortunately, in 2021, I have become a PC guy. You know, one of those people who walk around and say shit like, oh well, it's unplayable unless it runs at 144 frames per second, and if someone shows me like a console remaster, I'm just like, oh well, actually, it's looked like that on PC since it first launched. I'm not actually joking. It's both a blessing and a curse that Animal Crossing New Horizons will forever be entwined with a global pandemic. On the one hand, this game could not have launched at a more opportune moment, providing genuine respite and comfort to a global audience of players desperate to escape an uncertain reality. But at the same time, the best Animal Crossing game Nintendo has ever made will forever remind me of that period of time. I cannot revisit my island without feeling the dull hum of unease that defined my time with the game when it first launched in March 2020. Still, for what it's worth, my experience with New Horizons was perfect. The appeal of Nintendo's life simulator was always its lack of objectives, allowing the player to find their own fun within their tiny little commune of anthropomorphic residents, but New Horizons introduced a number of systems that provided players with optional yet tangible goals to work towards if they were looking for more direction. Crafting, for instance, always made sense for the series, giving players a more interactive way of acquiring furniture and tools, but the star of the show here was the introduction of landscaping. Finally, your randomly generated village, or island in this instance, is no longer a fixed location. You can construct cliffs, rivers, and paths before moving entire houses and facilities until you've designed your perfect deserted getaway. These tools increased the game's appeal exponentially, and even though I engaged with them far less than most, it added a few additional layers on top of what is often considered a fairly content-light experience. The best thing, however, is that New Horizons seemed to finally understand the true potential of Animal Crossing in the modern era. Timed events were paired with brand new and free expansions, increasing the game's collection of furniture, clothing, and characters. Although the updates dried up towards the tail end of 2020, this is a Nintendo game after all, they were never going to get it exactly right, the result was a title that offered a substantial amount more than its predecessors. When New Leaf launched on the 3DS and I found myself putting it down for good mere weeks after it released, I assumed that no other game in the series would ever top Wild World on the original DS. I played Wild World every single day for over a year, and it's responsible in a lot of ways for opening my eyes to experiences within the medium that have no interest in violence as a core facet of their design. I figured that was my Animal Crossing game, and that emotional connection could never be forged with any other entry in the series. New Horizons proved me wrong. When I think about New Horizons, I think about one very specific moment. It must have happened around April or May 2020. I was lying on the settee one night. It was maybe 3, 4 in the morning. I couldn't sleep because I was just so stressed out and anxious and sad about everything that was happening. I just felt so overwhelmed. And I remember smiling for the first time that whole day because my little villager, my little avatar, was stood on a beach. He closed his eyes and he wished upon a falling star. And it was beautiful. That game is special, I think, to so many people. I don't know. It's weird. It's a very weird one. It's high on this list, but maybe it would have been higher if it wasn't just so intrinsically linked to that period of time. Before Final Fantasy VII Remake, I had never completed a JRPG before. In fact, I had never progressed past the opening 5 to 6 hours of any game in the genre, finding the anime influences and long drawn out narratives to be a bit much for my basic action-adventure loving tastes. I think I played 2 hours of Ni no Kuni solely because I like Ghibli films and had a reaction so severe it could have been medically diagnosed as an anaphylactic shock. Suffice to say, my relationship with Final Fantasy has always been passive. I've played 7, 8, 10, 12 and 15 and have bounced off them harder than rubber against a moving wrecking ball. What is this? What the fuck? Who cares about this? So imagine my surprise when I found myself watching the credits roll on Final Fantasy VII Remake, a game I had no pre-existing nostalgia for, and found myself genuinely devastated that I had nothing left of it to play. I shouldn't like Final Fantasy VII Remake. It encapsulates everything I detest about JRPGs. Anime characters that go every 5 seconds, long, overly drawn out storylines, whatever the fuck this is. And yet, something about this game clicked. At the 10-hour mark, I found it grating but compelling. At 15 hours, I was reluctantly invested. At 25 hours, I was walking around the house spouting shit like, "Oh yeah, the evil house boss fight is super easy if you rely on Aerith's arcane ward ability. That lets you double up all your magic spells so you can really get some good hits in and try and get its stagger meter right up to the top. I love Aerith. I really hope that her and Cloud do a little bit of a kiss. I assume nothing bad will happen to her throughout the course of this story." Like, okay, I know Final Fantasy VII in the same way that everyone knows, I don't know, Star Wars. It's hard to have grown up with gaming as a hobby without being tangentially aware of the title's iconography and key story beats, but I guess I never understood the magic that made it so beloved. I didn't just care about these characters by the end of my 45 hours with the game. I kind of loved them. All of them. Even Jessie, I guess, at a push. Final Fantasy VII Remake is the most lavish video game I've ever played. It's clear that the developers over at Square Enix loved working on this game. For starters, it's ridiculously beautiful, presenting arguably the most stunning visuals of the year, but it's also incredibly self-aware of just how special it is to people. There's a narrative reason why the game so frequently winks at the player, something I enjoyed, not because I understood what it was referencing, necessarily, but because only a game made by Belt Daddy Nomura could be this fucking brazen. The combat was the first thing that got its hooks into me. I'm not a turn-based JRPG kind of guy because I've had sex with another person, so the introduction of fast-paced real-time combat is a positive improvement in my eyes. The combat is just so interesting here. Being able to perform cool combos, swap between characters on the fly, and also slow down time to a crawl in order to heal teammates and perform special moves gives combat a near faultless sense of flow. I could have spent an additional 100 hours just playing around with the game's combat system, and I'm thrilled with the possibility that, well, I'm probably going to have that opportunity at some point over the course of this console generation. Because yeah, despite the long wait, Final Fantasy VII Remake is just part 1 of what is sure to be a ludicrously drawn out retelling of Squaresoft's iconic adventure. It's dumb, it's stupid, I hate its side quests, and Cloud is the most boring main character ever devised, but god damn it if I don't love it for what it is. Fuck you, Square Enix, you've poisoned my brain by making me a Final Fantasy liker, and now I unironically think shit like, oh, I should probably buy Final Fantasy IX on the Switch. You've given me fucking brainworms. I'm trying to do like a dramatic thing here. Oh, stop putting your face in the camera. No, get away from the lens. What are you doing? Are you resting your head on the lens? Yes, that's a wire. Don't touch the wire, please. One benefit of making this video 12 months later is that it gives me the opportunity to play games I didn't have a chance to play during the year itself I'm talking about. In this instance, 2020's most inaccessible game, Half-Life Alyx. Now you might be thinking, what do you mean by inaccessible? Let me just show you. So first of all, I need to grab this, and I'm gonna need this because it needs to be wired up to a computer. You want to keep that wire out of the way, and then you want to get one of these. Just try and balance that. Then grab this, and then you want to just pop this on. No, that's not that on. Get that all ready. This is the future that Mark Zuckerberg wants. Valve's decision to resurrect the long-dormant Half-Life series as a virtual reality exclusive is a baffling one to say the least. Faced with hordes of ravenous fans desperate to see the adventures of Gordon Freeman concluded after 13 long years, Valve decided that the best course of action was to release a prequel that required not one but two expensive pieces of hardware in order to play it. So, like many other die-hard Half-Life fans, I was forced to sit glumly on the sidelines when Alyx originally launched in March 2020, resigned to the knowledge that I would just have to play this critically lauded experience at a vague point in the distant future. A bizarre situation, but I mean, in all fairness, there was something else pretty bizarre going on at the time, so it kinda just felt like par for the fucking course in March 2020. For Christmas, my very generous fiancée surprised me with an Oculus Quest 2, and after upgrading my coal-powered PC to something capable of running modern games in April 2021, I was finally in a position to take my first tentative steps into Half-Life Alyx. Alyx is a difficult game to talk about. It's far too easy to slip into evocative hyperbole, to refer to it as breathtaking, revolutionary, a masterclass in virtual reality game design and production, but at the same time, those statements are all true. There is nothing else available in virtual reality quite like Half-Life Alyx. No other game feels as confident as this. Its world is comparatively small and extremely linear, but each location is dense with interactive objects and realistic layouts that help immerse you within its world. City 17 has always felt like a real place, but never as much as it does here. Each room, each hallway, each wide open courtyard is a genuine treat to just poke around in. It makes your journey to uncover what the Combine hold within a mysterious floating vault as memorable as all previous entries in the series, all down to that physicality within its locales. Gameplay too is leagues ahead of its competitors. With only 4 weapons available, what Alyx lacks in variety it makes up for in finesse. Each gun feels incredible to use, with the machine gun handling wildly different to the base handgun. Having to manually eject a clip, grab a new one from your shoulder, insert it into the weapon, and then ready the firearm adds an intoxicating sense of tactility to firefights that, when paired with your actual physicality within the game world, results in a combat loop that evokes playing Laser Quasar more so than Half-Life 2. I mean, I've personally never had to physically scramble around a room while playing a game before, darting behind a virtual barrel to desperately reload my pistol as a squad of Combine enforcers take potshots at me in a train yard. You exist in this world, and it's ridiculous how quickly your dumb monkey brain can be tricked into feeling genuine panic by simply duct taping 2 tiny screens in front of your eyes. And somehow, layered on top of all of this innovative VR game design is a Half-Life story that is both compelling and satisfying, despite it being a prequel. Simply returning to City 17 is a treat in itself. The game's opening shot of the Eastern European-inspired skyline is genuinely breathtaking, but having the opportunity to spend time with both Alyx and her father Eli feels borderline emotional after so long apart. New characters such as Russell, brilliantly depicted by the ever-excellent Rhys Darby, further prove just how capable Valve are at creating a modern Half-Life game. This, ultimately, is the sole problem that lies at the heart of Alyx. Valve are fucking good at making Half-Life games, and although Alyx couldn't possibly be anything other than a VR game, and although it is absolutely a milestone release for the medium that every other VR game can only aspire to match in terms of design and execution, Alyx is fundamentally inaccessible. It is a masterpiece locked behind an expensive paywall, a piece of hardware that causes motion sickness in most users and is yet to reach the mainstream success a game like Alyx so desperately requires in order for it to be fully appreciated. I adore Half-Life Alyx. It made me reconsider my entire relationship with games as a medium and really open my eyes to the types of experiences they're capable of providing. It's just a shame that for most people, it's doomed to remain a hardware-specific curio that they'll never experience themselves. Paradise Killer deserves to be on the top of this list for a lot of reasons. It's a stellar detective game for starters, one that allows the player to form their own conclusions. Whereas most entries in the genre simply leave the player to follow a rigid path that leads to a sole resolution, Paradise Killer instead grants the player the ability to accuse whoever they like at any point during their playthrough. It is possible, encouraged even, to point your finger at whoever you deem to be responsible as long as you've uncovered enough evidence to support your claim. Although not as freeform as something like Return of the Obra Dinn, Paradise Killer manages to find a pleasing middle ground that makes whatever conclusion you choose feel incredibly satisfying. This is bolstered by the game's intoxicating set dressing, which is unlike anything else I've played before or since. As Detective Lady Love dies, you are released from a millennia in exile to uncover a plot against the ruling class of Paradise, an island located within a separate reality from our own. The Council, a group of pious narcissists who are attempting to resurrect a collection of dead gods, have been slaughtered, and somewhere on this warped, cursed island lies the truth. Paradise Killer does not take place in a discernible location. It is impossible, by design, to form conclusions based on real-world experiences. This is a city where blood is currency, where demons ooze into existence through a sort of interdimensional form of osmosis, and where kidnapped human beings are forced to toil within a power station that warps time itself. The mystery of where you are and your role within this bizarre society is as important and as interesting as the whodunit that serves as the game's primary objective. Throw in a soundtrack I literally haven't stopped listening to for over 12 months, a superb cast of brilliantly written characters, and an art style that does justice to the game's unique setting, and what you have is a game that would have blown me away no matter when it was released. But here's the thing, in 2020, a year where planes were grounded and we were all confined to our homes, Paradise Killer felt like a holiday. Review code landed in my inbox a few days before my birthday, and I spent 4 or 5 warm summer evenings picking my way through the sleepy streets of Paradise. As dreamlike a space as Paradise may be, there's something about this island that felt warm and inviting regardless. Maybe it was just because I was deficient in vitamin D after 6 months indoors, but the golden beaches and neon blue skies felt tangibly comforting. More than anything, Paradise captured that feeling of stepping off a plane for the first time in a brand new country, emerging into a fresh unknown. Those early, tentative moments are my favourite parts of travel, and learning to understand Paradise felt surprisingly similar. Paradise Killer is special. It's an inventive, thoughtful, beautiful experience. It's also an oddly comforting game that offered me a fleeting bit of respite during a very difficult year. It is without a doubt my game of the year and very much deserving of its #1 spot on this list. Alright, because this video isn't long enough as it is, I do have written here a few honourable mentions that I want to talk about. Streets of Rage 4 was a gorgeous revival of one of my favourite 2D classic beat-em-ups. I feel like not many people talk about this, but it was such a sublime experience. I absolutely loved that game, but it was just a bit too hard and a bit too old school to make it onto this list. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2, I think it's called, the remakes of the first 2 Tony Hawk games, was a wonderful remake. Pitch perfect, felt fantastic in the hands. I just didn't play enough of it to be on this list. If I did, it probably would have been on it. Ghost of Tsushima was a very good looking open world PS4 game that the more distance I had from it, the more I realised how little impact it had on me. Moment to moment gameplay feels really nice. Exploring the world is very pretty, but the story was pretty dull. It was full of collectibles. All the missions were basically just go here, kill these people. I don't know. It didn't really stick with me as much as I wanted it to. Good thing that wasn't #1 on my list on another website last year. We won't talk about that. Desperados 3 was a game I did a sponsored video for on Push Square, and only really played it for that sponsored video and didn't really think much of it pre-release, didn't really think it was going to be anything special, and my god, that game is so good. How do I even describe this? It's like playing Warcraft 3 crossed with Metal Gear Solid, but you only control like 2 or 3 characters at the same time, so it's isometric, turn-based, you can pause time, you've got abilities, you've got to try and like get around. It's almost like a puzzle game because you've got to get around enemies and their vision cones and try and solve objectives, and oh boy, that game is really good. But It's too hard, and I have a smooth brain, so I couldn't get that far in it. I love that game, and I really need to go back on it. I think it's on Game Pass on PC. I think it's probably better on PC. I played it on PlayStation, but yeah, good game. Very, very good game. And finally, Black Mesa launched in 2020. This was the fan-made remake of the original Half-Life. I'm about halfway through. I started playing it a few weeks ago. I think it's a fantastic remake. Quite often you are shocked that it's a fan-made project, that these people made it with no help from Valve. They did it unpaid. It was just a passion project that's been going on for, I mean, a long time now. I feel like I played the demo for that like 12 years ago or something. I don't know how long it's been in development for. Maybe that's an exaggeration, but it's a wonderful, wonderful love letter to that game. My only issue is that the original Half-Life is fundamentally a bit dated, and no matter how much modern polish they put on that base framework, it's still just a game from like 1999. But yeah, you should try that out. It gets deep discounted all the time on Steam, and it's a wonderful shooter, and it just feels fantastic to play. So there we have it, my favourite games of 2020. Sort of feels a little unsatisfying as an ending, really, doesn't it? Nah, fuck it, it's been a rough year. Hold on, I'll get the green screen out.